Imagine a tower of steel, taller than a 10-story building, falling back from the edge of space at the speed of a bullet, and then, in its final seconds, slowing gently and setting itself down softly on its own legs. Tonight, let these returning rockets carry you to sleep. Before we continue, just wanted to let you know that we have heard your feedback and we're now on Spotify. Go through the link in the description to join us there for a rich listening experience. For almost the entire history of spaceflight, that image was pure fantasy. Rockets went up, and rockets did not come back. They roared into the sky, spent themselves in a few violent minutes, and then fell away into the ocean or burned up in the air, gone forever. To reach space, humanity built some of the most magnificent machines it had ever made, and then threw every one of them away after a single use. That was simply how it was done. No one had ever managed to do it any other way. And then, not so long ago, that changed. A rocket rose into the sky, delivered its cargo toward space, and then, instead of falling away to be lost, it turned itself around. It fell back toward the Earth, faster and faster, a slender white tower plunging down out of the darkness. And in its final moments, when it seemed it must surely crash, it lit its engine once more, slowed itself against the pull of the planet, extended 4 legs from its base, and came to rest, standing upright and whole, gently balanced on the ground it had left only minutes before. A rocket had come home. If you have never seen footage of this, it is worth picturing slowly, because it looks almost impossible, like something running in reverse. We are so used to the idea of rockets as things that only ever go up and away. To watch one come back down, tail first, and land as softly as a bird settling onto a branch, feels like watching a law of nature quietly bend. People who saw it for the first time often described the same reaction, a kind of disbelief, followed by wonder, followed by something close to joy. It should not be possible. And yet there it stands, cooling in the evening air, ready to fly again. The company that taught rockets to do this is called SpaceX, and it is their story we will follow gently through this long night. Over the coming chapters, we will trace how a small and unlikely company set out to do something the giants of the space world had never managed, and how, step by patient step, they turned the fantasy of a returning rocket into something so routine that it now happens again and again, almost every week, often barely making the news at all. What once would have stopped the world in astonishment has become, in just a few short years, an ordinary Tuesday. But this is not a story to study or to remember. It is a story to rest inside. There is something deeply soothing about the whole idea once you sink into it. A machine of enormous power, capable of tearing free of the Earth itself, and yet gentle enough, careful enough, to come back down and land as lightly as a feather on exactly the spot it aimed for. Tremendous force, held in perfect, tender control. All that fire and thunder, ending not in destruction, but in a soft and graceful homecoming. There is a calm at the heart of that, a reassurance, the sense of a wild thing safely tamed. And so, over this quiet night, we will wander through it all without any hurry. We will go back to the very beginning, to a small company with an impossible dream and almost no money, and watch it very nearly fail. We will follow its rockets as they learned, slowly, to return from space and land on the ground, and even on floating platforms far out at sea. We will meet the most powerful rockets of their age, and a bright red car sailing silently around the sun, and the astronauts carried gently up to the space station overhead. And we will look up at the enormous silver giant now rising, a rocket built to carry people further than anyone has gone in half a century, all the way, perhaps one day, to Mars. There will be nothing you need to hold on to, No facts to keep, no numbers to remember. Simply let each wonder arrive softly and pass on, the way the lights of a city slide by a train window when you are warm and drowsy and someone else is doing the driving. Let your mind loosen its grip on the day. Let your breathing slow. For now, there is nothing to do but settle in and grow heavy and still. Somewhere out there tonight, under this same sky, a slender rocket is falling home through the dark, slowing gently, reaching out its legs, and coming to rest as softly as a held breath released. All that power, all that distance, ending in stillness. And as we follow these returning rockets through the quiet hours ahead, they are going to carry you, just as gently, all the way down into sleep. Every returning rocket, every gentle landing, began with a single dream, and it was a dream most sensible people thought was foolish. The story starts in the year 2002, when a new company was founded with a name that sounds almost like a wish: SpaceX. It was small. It had only a handful of people, a modest amount of money, and an idea so ambitious that established experts smiled politely and expected it to fail, because getting to space was not a business that welcomed newcomers. It was the domain of enormous government agencies and giant aerospace corporations, organizations with decades of experience, thousands of engineers, and budgets larger than some entire nations. Into that world walked a tiny startup, declaring that it intended to build rockets of its own, and not just to build them. The young company had two goals, and both were audacious, almost to the point of absurdity. The first was to make getting to space dramatically cheaper. For all of history, reaching orbit had been staggeringly expensive, so costly that only the wealthiest governments could truly afford it. SpaceX believed that the price could be brought down enormously, that space could be opened up, made more accessible, turned from a rare and precious undertaking into something far more ordinary. Exactly how, we will come to. But the belief itself, that spaceflight did not have to be so expensive, was already a quiet act of rebellion against everything the industry took for granted. The second goal was grander still, so grand it sounded like pure science fiction. The company's founding purpose, the reason it existed at all, was to help humanity become what it called multiplanetary. That is, to help our species one day live not only on Earth, but on other worlds as well, beginning with Mars. It was an idea almost too large to say out loud without embarrassment. The notion that a small company, just getting started, might play a part in eventually carrying human beings to another planet and helping them settle there. Most people who heard it did not know whether to laugh or simply look away. Think about the sheer daring of that, and about how easy it would have been to dismiss. Here was a new and tiny company, with none of the resources of the great space powers, setting itself two of the most difficult goals imaginable: to slash the cost of reaching space, something the giants themselves had never managed, and to reach, eventually, all the way to Mars. By every reasonable measure, the odds were overwhelmingly against them. The graveyard of history is full of ambitious companies that tried to enter the rocket business and quietly disappeared. Nearly everyone expected this one to join them. And yet, there is something quietly stirring about a small group of people choosing to try anyway, in the face of all that doubt. They were not naive about the difficulty. They knew perfectly well how hard it would be, how likely they were to fail, how much stood against them. They simply decided that the dream was worth attempting, that the possibility of opening up space and one day reaching another world was worth the very real risk of losing everything in the attempt. There is a kind of gentle courage in that, the courage to begin something enormous with no guarantee at all that it will work. Because that is how nearly every great thing begins, if you think about it. Not with certainty, not with overwhelming resources, but with a small group of hopeful people willing to try something that most others consider impossible. The tiny company we now know for its returning rockets and its giant silver spacecraft did not start out mighty. It started out fragile, underfunded, doubted, and armed with little more than a dream and the willingness to chase it. Everything that came afterward, all the wonders we will explore tonight, grew from that modest and uncertain beginning. There is comfort in remembering that, and it is a soothing thought to rest upon. The vast achievements that can seem so far beyond us almost always trace back to humble, doubtful starts. No one hands you certainty at the beginning. You simply choose to try, and then to keep trying, and slowly, if you are fortunate and persistent, the impossible begins to take shape. The mightiest oak was once a small seed in the dark soil, and the company that would teach rockets to come home was once just a handful of dreamers that the world expected to fail. So let that gentle beginning settle over you now. A small startup in the year 2002 with almost nothing but a pair of impossible dreams, choosing to reach for the stars anyway. No mighty fleet, no vast fortune, only hope and daring and the quiet decision to begin. Everything else, all the returning rockets and orbiting cars and journeys toward Mars, still lay far ahead, unimagined and unbuilt, waiting patiently in the years to come. But dreams, however grand, must be tested against reality, and reality can be harsh. In the next chapter, we will follow that hopeful young company through its first great trial, as its very first rocket tried, and failed, and tried again, and came within a hair's breadth of ending the whole dream before it had truly begun. A dream is a beautiful thing, but a rocket must actually fly, and the young company's first rocket very nearly ended everything. It was called Falcon 1, and it was small, a slender rocket, far more modest than the giants SpaceX would later build. It was where they had to begin, though, because you cannot leap straight to the enormous. You must first prove you can reach orbit at all, with something simpler, and Falcon 1 was that first attempt. Into it went the company's early hopes, its money, and years of the hardest kind of work, the work of building something that has never quite existed before, and coaxing it toward the sky. The first launch failed. Not long after leaving the ground, something went wrong, and the rocket was lost. This is not unusual in the world of rocketry, where even the mightiest organizations have suffered failures. But for a small company with limited money, every failure was a serious wound. They studied what had gone wrong, fixed it as best they could, and prepared to try again. The second launch failed too. Again the rocket rose, and again, before reaching orbit, something went wrong and it was lost. The money was running lower now, the pressure greater, the doubters louder. But once more the team picked themselves up, examined the wreckage of their hopes, learned what they could, and pressed on toward a third attempt. The third launch also failed. 3 rockets built, 3 rockets lost, and with each one, a great deal of the company's dwindling resources gone with it. By this point, SpaceX was in genuine danger of running out of money altogether. The dream that had seemed so grand just a few years earlier was now hanging by the thinnest of threads. There was, by most accounts, only enough left for one more attempt. One final rocket. If it failed like the 3 before it, the company would very likely be finished, the whole adventure ending quietly in bankruptcy, another hopeful venture that reached too far and fell short. Imagine the weight of that 4th launch. Everything came down to it. Years of work, all the money that remained, the entire future of the company and its impossible dreams, all resting on a single slender rocket standing on a distant island launch pad. There would be no 5th try. Whatever happened next would decide whether the story continued or ended right there. It is hard to imagine the quiet tension of the people who had given so much, watching and waiting, knowing that this was the last roll of the dice. In the autumn of 2008, the fourth Falcon 1 lifted off. It climbed away from the pad, up through the lower air, its single engine burning steadily. The critical moments passed, the ones where the earlier rockets had failed, and this time nothing went wrong. It kept climbing, kept accelerating, higher and faster, out beyond the atmosphere, and then, at last, it reached orbit. The rocket had done it. After 3 heartbreaking failures, on the very last attempt they could afford, Falcon 1 flew successfully into space. It was more than a survival, it was history. Falcon 1 became the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket ever to reach orbit around the Earth. Not a rocket built by a government or a great national program, but one built by a small private company, had done what only nations had done before. The dream that everyone expected to die had, at the final possible moment, come gloriously alive. The company would live to fly another day, and then thousands of other days after that. There is a lesson folded into that fourth flight that is worth resting on gently, because it is one of the most human and hopeful lessons there is. Success did not come easily or quickly. It came only after failure, and more failure, and more failure still. 3 times the dream was struck down, and 3 times the people behind it rose, learned, and tried again. And it was the 4th attempt, made when almost all hope and money were gone, that finally carried them to orbit. Had they given up after the first failure, or the second, or the third, as it would have been so easy and so reasonable to do, the whole story would have ended in silence. We so often see only the triumph, the returning rockets and the giant spacecraft, and imagine that success came smoothly to those who achieved it. The truth is almost always the opposite. Behind nearly every great success lie failures that came before, quiet defeats that could have ended everything, endured and pushed through by people who simply refused to stop. The company that would go on to land rockets and reach toward Mars was, at one point, 3 failures deep and nearly out of money, and it succeeded only because it tried one more time. So let that hopeful thought carry you further toward rest. However many times something falls short, there is always the possibility of one more attempt, and sometimes it is that final try, made against all the odds, that changes everything. The little rocket that reached orbit on its 4th and last chance is proof, glowing quietly in the history of spaceflight, that persistence can carry us through even the darkest and most discouraging nights. In the next chapter, we will look at the bold idea that this hard-won survival made possible, the notion that a rocket, instead of being thrown away, might be flown home and used again. Now that the little company had survived and reached orbit, it turned its attention to the idea that would change everything. An idea so simple that it is surprising no one had made it work before. What if a rocket did not have to be thrown away? To understand why this mattered so much, we have to understand the strange and wasteful way rockets had always been used. For the entire history of spaceflight, rockets were built to be used exactly once. A rocket would be constructed over many months, at enormous cost, out of the finest materials and the most precise engineering humanity could manage. It would fly a single time, for a few minutes, carrying its cargo up toward space, and then it would be gone, its pieces falling away to burn up in the atmosphere or crash into the ocean, never to be seen or used again. Every single flight required building an entirely new rocket from scratch. Consider how astonishing that is when you set it beside almost anything else we build. Imagine if an airline built a brand new jumbo jet at the cost of hundreds of millions, flew it just once across the ocean, and then, upon landing, threw the entire aircraft away, scrapped it completely, and built another new one for the next flight. No airline could possibly survive doing that. A ticket across the ocean would cost a fortune, and flying would remain a rare privilege of the very rich. The only reason air travel is affordable at all is that the same aircraft flies again and again, thousands of times, spreading its enormous cost across countless journeys. And yet, with rockets, throwing the whole machine away after one use was simply how it had always been done. It was accepted as unavoidable, just the price of reaching space. And it was, in fact, the single biggest reason that spaceflight was so breathtakingly expensive. You were not merely paying for the fuel or the journey. You were paying every single time to build an entirely new and fabulously complex machine that would be destroyed after a few minutes of use. The rocket itself, the most costly part by far, was gone after one flight. The people at SpaceX looked at this and asked a question that sounds obvious once you hear it, but that had defeated everyone who tried it before. What if the rocket did not have to be destroyed? What if, instead of falling away to be lost, the most expensive part of the rocket could somehow return safely to Earth, be checked over, refueled, and flown again? And then, again and again, like an aircraft? If that could be done, the cost of reaching space would not merely fall a little. It could fall enormously, because you would no longer have to build a whole new rocket for every journey. You would simply reuse the one you already had. This was the great bet at the heart of the company. The idea that everything else would be built upon: reusability, teaching a rocket to come home. It sounds simple when stated plainly, but it had never truly been achieved, because it is monstrously difficult. A rocket that launches upward is not built, by nature, to come back down gently and land in one piece. It is designed to hurl itself away from the Earth as fast as possible. To make it return, slow itself, and set itself down softly enough to be used again would require solving problems that had stumped the finest engineers for decades. Many believed it simply could not be done in any practical way. But if it could be done, the reward would be extraordinary. Not just a cheaper rocket, but a whole new relationship with space. If rockets could fly again and again like aircraft, then launching to space could become frequent, almost routine, no longer a rare and precious event, but an ordinary occurrence. And that, in turn, was the key that could unlock everything else: the satellites, the astronauts, and one day, perhaps, the journeys to Mars. All of it depended on first solving this one deep problem, on making the rocket that comes home. There is something quietly beautiful in the simplicity of that insight, and it is a restful thing to consider. So much of what seems impossibly expensive or difficult in our world is really just a matter of habit, of doing things the way they have always been done, without asking whether there might be a better way. For decades, everyone accepted that rockets must be thrown away, because that was simply how it was. It took a fresh pair of eyes, unburdened by all that accepted wisdom, to ask the simple question: why not use it again? Sometimes, the most powerful ideas are not complicated at all. They are simply a matter of noticing what everyone else has stopped noticing. So let that gentle idea settle in your mind as you sink deeper towards sleep. A rocket that need not be thrown away. A machine of tremendous power that could come home, rest, and rise again. It seemed impossible to almost everyone, and yet a small company had decided to make it real, and in doing so, to change what reaching space could mean. In the next chapter, we will witness the moment that this bold idea stopped being a dream and became astonishing reality. The night a rocket first fell back from the sky and landed, standing tall and whole, upon the Earth. And so we come to the night the dream became real, the night a rocket first fell back from space and landed, standing upright and whole, upon the ground. By this time, the company had moved well beyond its small first rocket. It was now flying a much larger and more capable one called the Falcon 9, a tall white rocket that could carry satellites and cargo toward orbit. For a while, these rockets flew their missions, and then, like all rockets before them, fell away and were lost. But behind the scenes, the company was practicing, attempt after attempt, trying to bring the largest part of the rocket, the first stage, safely back to Earth. They tried guiding it down toward the ocean and toward platforms, learning a little more each time, coming closer and closer, but not quite succeeding. Each near miss taught them something. Each failure refined the attempt. Then came a December night in the year 2015. A Falcon 9 lifted off, climbed into the darkness, and released its cargo of satellites towards space, exactly as it was meant to. That part was ordinary by now. But this time, the first stage of the rocket, having done its job of pushing toward orbit, did something extraordinary. Instead of falling away to be lost, it turned itself around in the upper air and began the long journey home. Picture that slender tower, high above the Earth, flipping around and aiming itself back toward the ground it had left minutes before. It fell, faster and faster, plunging down through the dark sky. And then, at the crucial moments, it did the things that had been so painstakingly worked out. It fired its engine to slow its tremendous fall. It steered itself with delicate precision toward a specific landing pad near the Florida coast. It extended 4 legs from its base, and as it neared the ground, it slowed and slowed, easing downward through its final moments until it settled, gently and perfectly, onto the landing pad, standing tall and upright and entirely intact, its engine quieting to silence. A rocket had launched to the edge of space and then landed itself, whole, back on the Earth. It had never been done before with a rocket of this kind, a genuine orbital-class rocket that had just been to space. In the control room, the reaction was pure, unguarded joy. People leapt from their seats. They cheered and shouted and embraced one another, overcome, many of them near tears. Years of work, of failure, of stubborn hope had come down to this single moment, and the moment had delivered. The impossible had just happened in front of their eyes, and it was, by every account, a genuinely beautiful sight. There is something almost unreal about watching it, even now. We are so deeply used to the idea that rockets only go up and away, that they are things of one-way violence, that to see one come back down, tail first, and land as softly and precisely as a dancer coming to rest, feels like watching the world run backward. The slender white tower, standing calm and cooling on the pad, having just returned from the very edge of space, whole and ready to fly again. It looked like a scene from a film about the future, and yet it was simply, wonderfully real. That single landing changed everything that would follow. It was the proof, at last, that the great bet could be won, that a rocket really could come home and be reused. Everything the company had staked its survival on, everything the doubters had said was impossible, had just been shown to be real, standing upright on a landing pad in the Florida night. From this moment, the path opened toward everything else, toward flying the same rocket again and again, toward slashing the cost of reaching space, toward all the wonders still ahead in our story. There is deep satisfaction in a moment like that, and it is a lovely thing to rest upon as the night deepens. Think of all that had to come together for it to happen. The founding dream, doubted by nearly everyone. The 3 failures and the desperate 4th success that kept the company alive. The bold, simple idea that a rocket need not be thrown away. And then years of patient practice, of falling short and trying again, until finally, On one December night, it all came together, and a rocket came home. Every earlier struggle, every setback, was a step toward this. Nothing had been wasted. So picture that peaceful, triumphant scene as you let yourself grow heavier and calmer. The dark Florida sky, the slender rocket falling home through the night, slowing, reaching out its legs, and settling softly onto the pad, standing tall and whole and still. The distant sound of cheering. Years of hope finally answered. A machine of enormous power brought home as gently as a wish. All that striving resolved at last into a single quiet rocket, standing calm beneath the stars. The impossible had become real, and once something impossible has been done even once, it can be done again. In the next chapter, we will follow these returning rockets out over the ocean to discover how they learned to land not only on solid ground, but on small floating platforms far out at sea, platforms with some of the most charming names you will ever hear. Landing a rocket on solid ground was a triumph, but it turned out that solid ground was a luxury the rockets could not always afford. And so these returning rockets learned to do something even stranger, to come down and land on a small platform floating far out in the open ocean. The reason has to do with speed and fuel. Some missions are gentle enough that after the rocket's first stage finishes its work, it still has enough fuel left to turn all the way around and fly back to the coast to land. But other missions, the ones carrying heavier cargo or reaching for higher, faster orbits, use up so much more energy that the returning rocket simply cannot make it all the way back to land. By the time its work is done, it is too far out over the sea, moving too fast in the wrong direction, without the fuel to reverse its course and reach the shore. For these flights, landing back on solid ground was impossible, but the company did not want to give up on saving those rockets, so they came up with an ingenious answer. If the rocket could not come back to the land, then the landing spot would go out to meet the rocket. They built floating landing platforms, sturdy barges topped with a wide, flat deck, and they positioned these platforms far out in the ocean, directly beneath the path the returning rocket would take. The rocket, unable to reach the shore, would instead come down and land on this platform, waiting for it in the middle of the sea. These floating platforms are remarkable machines in their own right. They are uncrewed, guided by their own systems, and able to hold themselves steady at a precise spot on the open water, fighting the wind and the waves to stay exactly where the rocket needs them to be. And landing on one is even harder than landing on solid ground, because the target is so much smaller, and because the sea is never perfectly still. Picture the challenge of it. A slender rocket, falling from the edge of space, aiming not at a broad landing pad on firm Earth, but at a modest platform bobbing gently on the swells of the vast ocean, a small steel deck alone in an immense expanse of water, and hitting it, dead center, standing upright, softly. For a while, the rockets tried and missed, coming down too hard or tipping over on the deck. But in the year 2016, it finally worked. A Falcon 9 first stage, returning from a mission too demanding to allow a landing back on shore, came down out of the sky and settled perfectly onto one of these floating platforms far out at sea, standing tall and whole upon the deck as the ocean rolled gently around it. A rocket had landed on a boat in the middle of the sea. What had seemed like an almost absurd idea, catching a returning rocket on a small platform adrift on the ocean, had been made real. And here we come to one of the most delightful little details in the whole story: the names of these floating platforms. The person behind the company was fond of a series of science fiction novels, and in those books, great intelligent starships bore wonderful, whimsical names. So the ocean landing platforms were named in tribute to them. One is called, Of Course I Still Love You. Another is called just read the instructions. A third bears the marvelous name, a shortfall of gravitas. Imagine that. A rocket falling home from the edge of space, guiding itself down through the darkness, to land at last upon a platform in the middle of the ocean, called Of Course I Still Love You. There is something so tender and playful in that, a bit of poetry and humor tucked into the heart of all that hard engineering. There is real charm in that choice, and it is a soothing thing to sit with. Here is some of the most serious and difficult work human beings have ever attempted. The landing of rockets returned from space, and woven right through it is this thread of gentle whimsy, these affectionate, funny names bobbing on the ocean waves. It is a reminder that even the grandest and most demanding endeavors are carried out by people. People with a sense of humor, a love of stories, and a wish to bring a little warmth and playfulness, even to the edge of space. The rockets are precise and powerful, but the platforms they land on carry names that could make you smile. So picture it now, as you settle further into the quiet. Far out on the dark and open ocean, a small platform holds its position on the rolling swells, alone beneath the stars, waiting. And down out of the night sky comes a slender rocket, slowing, steadying, reaching out its legs, and setting itself down softly upon that little floating deck in the middle of the endless sea. All around it, the gentle motion of the water. Above it, the stars. And beneath its feet, a platform bearing a name as warm and whimsical as a line from a favorite story. In the next chapter, we will see how landing rockets, once a breathtaking miracle, became so routine that it now happens again and again, with the same rockets flying to space and home many times over. When the first rocket landed, it stunned the world. What is perhaps even more remarkable is what happened next, because within just a few years, that same astonishing feat became so ordinary that it barely draws attention at all. Landing a rocket was only ever half the point. The whole reason for bringing a rocket home was to fly it again, and this was, in its own way, an even greater challenge than the landing. A rocket that has been to the edge of space and back has endured tremendous stresses, terrible heat, enormous forces, the violence of launch and the fury of return. To take such a machine, check it over, refuel it, and trust it to fly safely a second time was a daunting task. And to do it not once but many times, over and over with the same rocket, seemed to many almost as unlikely as the landing itself. Yet that is exactly what came to pass, and faster than almost anyone expected. The company began to fly its returned rockets again. A booster that had launched to space and landed would be inspected, prepared, and then flown on a whole new mission, and it would land once more, and then fly yet again. What had been unthinkable became first possible, then normal, then routine, and the number of flights a single rocket could make kept climbing. A booster might fly 5 times, then 10, then 20. The same slender tower of metal, going to the edge of space and returning, again and again and again. Today, the achievement has reached heights that would have seemed pure fantasy not long ago. A single one of these rocket boosters has now flown more than 36 times. One booster, launched and launched again, over 36 separate journeys to the edge of space and home. It is approaching a record that once seemed almost sacred. The number of flights made by the Space Shuttle orbiters, the most reused spacecraft of an earlier era, which flew as many as 39 times each over decades of service. This single booster is closing in on that mark, not over decades, but in just a handful of years. And across its whole fleet, the company has now brought rockets home from space and landed them more than 600 times. Let that number rest gently in your mind. More than 600 rocket landings. Each one, only a few years ago, would have been a history-making event, front-page news around the world, a moment of collective astonishment. Now they happen so often that most of them pass almost unnoticed. A rocket launches, delivers its cargo towards space, and lands itself back on the Earth or on a platform at sea, and the world barely pauses, because it has seen it so many times before. Rockets now launch and land most weeks, sometimes more than one in a single day. The miraculous has quietly become the everyday. There is something profound in that transformation, and it is a peaceful thing to reflect upon as the night grows late. Think of how quickly the impossible can become ordinary once someone finally proves it can be done at all. For the entire history of spaceflight, no one had landed and reused an orbital rocket. Then it was done once, to worldwide amazement. And now, just a few short years later, it has been done more than 600 times, so routinely that it hardly makes the news. The barrier that had stood for decades did not merely fall. It fell so completely that we have already grown used to a world on the other side of it. This is often how great changes settle into our lives. Something that was impossible becomes, first, a stunning breakthrough, and then, remarkably fast, simply the way things are. The children being born today will grow up in a world where rockets routinely come home and fly again. And to them it will seem perfectly natural, no more surprising than an aeroplane landing and taking off once more. The astonishment of that first landing will be, to them, simply how rockets have always worked. What amazes one generation becomes the quiet background of the next. And this is the very thing that has begun to open up space. Because the rockets are flown again and again, instead of being thrown away, the cost of reaching orbit has fallen dramatically, just as the founding dream imagined. Space has become more accessible than it has ever been, busier, more frequent, more ordinary in the best possible way. The returning rocket, once a miracle, is now the reliable workhorse, quietly carrying satellites and supplies and people toward the sky, over and over, week after week. So let that gentle marvel settle over you now. Somewhere tonight, a rocket that has already been to space many times over is being readied to fly once more, calm and proven and familiar. A machine that comes home and rests and rises again, as naturally now as the sun setting and rising. The impossible made ordinary, the miraculous made routine, and all of it happening quietly, faithfully, again and again, beneath the same wide sky under which you are now settling towards sleep. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at how these rockets actually fly, at the powerful engines that lift them, and at the simple, soothing physics that carries a tower of steel up into the heavens. We have watched these rockets rise and return so many times now that it is worth pausing to ask a simple question. How does a rocket fly at all? The answer is one of the most elegant and soothing ideas in all of science. At the base of the Falcon 9, the workhorse rocket we have been following, sit 9 engines. They are called Merlins, and they are arranged in a circle at the bottom of the rocket, 8 of them ringed around a 9th in the center. When the rocket launches, all 9 of these engines light at once, burning together to lift the entire towering vehicle up off the pad and into the sky. They burn a special kind of highly refined kerosene, not so very different in nature from the fuel that powers aircraft, combined with liquid oxygen, which the rocket must carry with it because there is no air to breathe in space. Fuel and oxygen, fed together into the engines, burning fiercely, producing an immense rush of hot gas. And here is the beautifully simple principle at the heart of it all, the idea that lifts a tower of steel toward the heavens. A rocket flies by throwing something downward. The engines take all that burning fuel and hurl the resulting hot gas downward, out of the bottom of the rocket, at tremendous speed. And when you throw something down with great force, that force pushes back on you, upward, with exactly equal strength. It is the same reason a swimmer pushes water backward to move forward, or why a boat's oar pushes against the water to drive the boat ahead. The rocket pushes an enormous amount of gas down and away beneath it, and in return, the gas pushes the rocket up. Push down hard enough, throw enough gas fast enough, and the push upward becomes strong enough to lift the whole rocket off the ground and carry it towards space. That is really all a rocket is doing, at its core. It is throwing mass downward as hard and as fast as it possibly can, and riding the answering push upward. There is no magic to it, no mysterious force, just this clean and simple exchange, repeated with overwhelming power. For every push down, an equal push up. The rocket flings its burning fuel toward the ground, and the sky opens above it. It is one of the most fundamental truths in all of physics, and it is what carries every rocket, and everyone who has ever ridden one, up and away from the Earth. There is a reason, too, that the Falcon 9 has as many as 9 engines rather than 1 or 2, and it is a reassuring one. With 9 engines working together, the rocket has a built-in safety net. If one of the 9 were to fail during flight, to shut down unexpectedly, the rocket would not necessarily be lost. The remaining engines can often burn a little longer or a little harder, and still carry the rocket safely to where it needs to go. It is like a team pulling a heavy load together, where if one member stumbles, the others can take up the slack, and the work still gets done. The many engines share the effort, and they share the risk, making the whole rocket safer and more dependable. There is a quiet beauty in understanding this, and it is a restful thing to hold in mind as the night deepens. The rockets we have been marveling at, for all their power and complexity, fly by a principle simple enough to feel in your own body. Push against something, and it pushes back. Throw something one way, and you are pushed the other. A child on roller skates, throwing a heavy ball, rolls gently backward. A rocket, throwing tons of fiery gas downward, climbs toward the stars. The same simple truth, scaled up to lift a tower of steel beyond the sky. The universe runs on a handful of elegant rules like this, and once you see them, you begin to notice them everywhere. And there is comfort, too, in the idea of those 9 engines sharing the load, watching over one another, ready to make up for a stumble. It speaks to something gentle and true, that strength often lies not in a single mighty effort, but in many working together, each supporting the others, so that no one failure need bring the whole endeavor down. The rocket rises safely towards space, carried by 9 engines pulling as one, and there is a quiet wisdom in that arrangement. So let that simple, elegant idea settle over you as you grow heavier and calmer. A rocket rising into the night, its engines throwing fire downward with all their might, and the answering push lifting it gently but surely toward the stars. No magic, only a clean and ancient truth, the same one that moves a swimmer through water and a boat across a lake, here lifting a great steel tower up and away from the earth. Push down, rise up, fire below, stars above, the whole vast achievement of spaceflight, resting on something as simple and as steady as a held breath, gently released. In the next chapter, we will meet a far more powerful rocket still, one that joined 3 of these mighty machines together and gave the world one of the most breathtaking sights in all of spaceflight. The 9-engine rocket we have been following is powerful, but for the heaviest cargo and the most distant destinations, even it is not enough. And so the company built something grander by taking that rocket and, in effect, multiplying it by 3. The idea was strikingly simple. If one Falcon 9 first stage, with its 9 engines, is powerful, then joining 3 of them together, side by side, would be far more powerful still. So they took 3 of these rocket cores and strapped them together, one in the center and one on each side, to create a single enormous rocket called the Falcon Heavy. With 3 cores bound together, it had not 9 engines but 27, all igniting at once at the moment of launch, a combined force of staggering proportions. When it first flew, in the year 2018, it became the most powerful operational rocket in the world, capable of lifting far heavier loads and reaching for more distant places than almost anything else then flying. Imagine the sheer power of that first liftoff. 27 engines, arranged across 3 joined rockets, all roaring to life together in a single instant, unleashing a torrent of fire and thunder beneath the vehicle. The ground shakes for miles around. A sound like nothing else on Earth rolls out across the landscape. And slowly, then faster, the immense rocket lifts away from the pad and climbs into the sky, carried upward by that tremendous combined thrust. It was one of the most powerful machines humanity had ever flown, and watching it rise was, by every account, an overwhelming experience, felt in the chest as much as heard. But the most beautiful moment of that first flight came not at the launch, but a few minutes later, when the rocket did something that left everyone who saw it breathless. After the 2 side boosters had done their work of helping to lift the rocket, they detached and began their journey home, just as the returning rockets we have been following always do. But this time there were 2 of them, falling back through the sky together, side by side. And they came down not out at sea, but back toward the coast, aiming for 2 landing pads set near one another on solid ground. Picture what happened next, because it is one of the loveliest sights in all of spaceflight. The 2 side boosters, having separated from the rocket high above, turned themselves around and fell back toward the Earth in tandem. They steered through the sky, slowing themselves, reaching out their legs. And then, almost in perfect unison, as though performing a carefully rehearsed dance, the 2 of them settled down onto their side-by-side landing pads at very nearly the same instant, standing tall and upright together, twins coming home as one. 2 rockets, falling from the edge of space, landing gently side by side in near-perfect synchrony. People watching gasped and cheered, hardly able to believe what they were seeing. It looked less like engineering and more like choreography, like a moment from a dream. That synchronized landing became one of the defining images of the whole adventure, and it is easy to see why. There is something deeply satisfying, almost musical, about 2 mighty rockets returning together and touching down in unison, mirror images of one another, perfectly matched. All that power, all that speed, all that distance, resolved into a single graceful, coordinated moment of stillness. 2 towers, standing quietly together, where a heartbeat before they had been falling from the sky. It is the kind of sight that stays with a person, a small miracle of precision and beauty. There is a gentle wonder in that image, worth resting upon as the night grows late. Consider the astonishing control it represents, that not 1 but 2 rockets, each falling independently from the edge of space, could each be guided so precisely that they arrive at their separate landing pads at nearly the same moment, standing side by side, like old companions returning home together. It speaks of a mastery so complete that it can afford to be graceful, that can turn the raw violence of a rocket's return into something that looks, for all the world, like a dance. Power under such perfect control that it becomes, in the end, a kind of beauty. So picture that scene now, as you let yourself sink further toward rest. The most powerful rocket of its age, climbing away on 27 engines of fire. And then, minutes later, the two side boosters falling home through the sky together, slowing, steadying, reaching out their legs, and settling down side by side onto the earth in near-perfect unison. Two tall towers coming quietly to rest as one. All that thunder ending in a graceful, synchronized stillness. A dance of returning giants, performed against the wide and open sky. It was a triumph of power, and of control, and of beauty, all at once. And on that very same first flight of the Falcon Heavy, the rocket carried into space, perhaps the most whimsical and dreamlike cargo ever launched by anyone, anywhere, a cargo that is still traveling through the heavens to this very day. In the next chapter, we will follow that strange and wonderful payload out into the depths of space and discover the bright red car and its silent driver that now sail forever around the sun. Now we come to one of the most delightful and dreamlike facts in this whole story, the tale of a bright red car that sails, to this very day, through the depths of space. When engineers test a brand new rocket for the very first time, they face a small dilemma about what to put inside it. That first flight is risky, since the rocket has never flown before, and no one wants to lose something valuable if it fails. So they usually load the rocket with a lump of dead weight instead, a heavy block of concrete or steel, something worthless that simply mimics the weight of real cargo. It is a sensible, practical, and utterly unglamorous tradition. A boring block of metal sent up on the first flight just to prove the rocket can carry a load. But for the first flight of the enormous Falcon Heavy, the company decided to do something far more imaginative. Instead of a dull block of concrete, they chose to launch a real car. Not a model, not a mock-up, but an actual, road-going sports car. A cherry-red Tesla Roadster, the personal car of the company's founder. They placed it atop the most powerful rocket in the world, and they prepared to fling it into space. And they did not send it up empty. Sitting in the driver's seat, dressed in a real spacesuit, was a mannequin, a human-shaped figure they named Starman, after a song about a traveler from the stars. Starman sat calmly behind the wheel, one hand resting on it, as though out for a casual drive through the cosmos. On the dashboard in front of him, they had placed a small sign bearing two friendly words, a gentle joke borrowed from a beloved science fiction story, "Don't Panic." And the car's sound system was set to play music, songs by David Bowie, out into the silence, as the strange vehicle and its calm driver sailed away from the Earth. Now here is the part that lifts the whole thing from a charming stunt into something genuinely wondrous. The car was not sent into orbit around the Earth, to circle our planet for a while and eventually fall back. It was sent far beyond that, out into orbit around the sun itself. The rocket flung the red car and its spacey-suited driver onto a great looping path that carries them around the sun, out through the solar system, on a journey reaching all the way out to the distance of the orbit of Mars and back. Starman and his car became, in effect, a tiny artificial world of their own, circling the sun as the planets do, and they are still out there. Years later, that bright red car and its silent, spacey-suited driver are still traveling through the vast emptiness of space, still looping around the sun, having by now journeyed billions upon billions of miles. Somewhere out there, right now, as you lie here settling towards sleep, a cherry-red sports car is sailing silently through the dark, Starman at the wheel, one hand resting calmly on it, the little sign on the dashboard still gently advising anyone who might find it not to panic. Around and around the sun it goes, in perfect silence, through the endless night of space, a small and whimsical human thing set adrift among the planets. There is something almost unbearably lovely and dreamlike about that image, and it is a perfect thing to rest your mind upon as you sink towards sleep. Picture it, the deep, black, silent emptiness of space, scattered with distant stars. And through it, moving slowly and gracefully, a bright red car, catching the far light of the sun, with a spacey-suited figure seated calmly at the wheel, gazing out at the cosmos, as though on an unhurried Sunday drive that will never end. No sound out there, no rush, no destination, just the car and its quiet driver, sailing on and on through the beautiful dark, around and around the sun, for years, for decades, perhaps for millions of years to come. It is at once playful and profound, silly and sublime. A car in space which makes us smile, and yet also a genuine human object, now sailing among the planets, which fills us with wonder. It captures something wonderful about the whole spirit of this adventure, the way it blends serious achievement with pure imagination and joy. They could have sent up a block of concrete. Instead, they sent a red car with a space-suited driver and a friendly note, and gave the cosmos a small, whimsical passenger to carry through the ages. So let that gentle, dreamlike picture carry you further toward rest. Far away, in the silent dark between the worlds, a bright red car is sailing peacefully around the sun, its calm driver at the wheel, in no hurry at all, going nowhere and everywhere, on the longest and most tranquil drive imaginable. There is nothing to do out there but travel quietly through the stars. And there is nothing for you to do now either, but let your mind wander gently after that little red car into the peaceful dark and rest. In the next chapter, we will return from the depths of space to something closer to home and closer to the heart. The day these rockets began, once again, to carry living human beings up into the sky. For all the wonder of returning rockets and orbiting cars, there is something that stirs the human heart more deeply than any of it. And that is the moment these rockets began, once again, to carry living people up into the sky. To understand why this mattered so much, we have to know a quiet, rather sad fact about the years before. For a long time, the United States had sent its astronauts to space aboard its own famous space shuttles. But in the year 2011, those shuttles were retired, flown for the last time, and sent to museums. And after that, for nearly a decade, something surprising was true. The United States, the nation that had sent people to the moon, no longer had any way of its own to launch astronauts into space. Whenever American astronauts needed to reach orbit, they had to buy seats aboard the rockets of other nations. For 9 long years, no human being launched into space from American soil. That was the silence that SpaceX set out to end. The company had built a spacecraft called Dragon, a capsule designed to ride atop the Falcon 9 rocket we have come to know so well. A version of it had already been carrying cargo and supplies up to the space station for years, proving itself gentle and reliable. Now they had built a new version, made to carry not cargo but people, with seats and life support and all the care that keeping human beings alive in space demands. And in the year 2020, it was ready for its first true test, the one that mattered most. It would carry astronauts. On a day in late May of that year, 2 experienced astronauts, named Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, climbed into the Dragon capsule as it sat atop a Falcon 9 rocket, on the same historic launch pad from which astronauts had journeyed to the moon half a century before. The countdown reached its end, the 9 engines lit, and the rocket rose into the sky, carrying the 2 astronauts up and away from the Earth, smoothly and safely into orbit. For the first time in nearly 10 years, human beings had launched into space from American soil once more. And for the very first time in all of history, a private company, rather than a government, had carried people into orbit. Think about the weight and wonder of that moment. All the years of struggle we have followed, the near bankruptcy, the failures, the patient work of learning to land rockets, had led at last to this, to the trust required to place two living human lives atop one of these rockets and carry them safely to space. It is one thing to launch satellites and cargo, where a failure means lost equipment. It is another thing entirely to launch people, where everything must work, where two human beings are placing their lives in your hands. That the little company once expected to fail had earned that trust and fulfilled it and carried its astronauts gently and safely to orbit was a triumph of the deepest kind. And by every account, for all the tremendous power involved, the experience for the astronauts was remarkably smooth. The rocket carried them up with that same controlled strength we have seen throughout. All the fire and force precisely governed so that the humans inside were kept safe and secure. They rode the rocket up through the atmosphere, felt it press them into their seats, and then, as the engines finished their work, felt the sudden gentle weightlessness of orbit, floating quietly in their capsule high above the blue and curving Earth. They had arrived in space, safe and sound, carried there by a private rocket that had come, over the years, to be trusted with the most precious cargo of all. There is something deeply moving in that achievement, and it is a warm thing to rest your heart upon as the night grows late. Behind all the engineering and the machinery, the whole purpose of this endeavor has always been, in the end, about people, about carrying human beings safely out into the cosmos and bringing them home again. The returning rockets, the powerful engines, the years of patient work, all of it converged on this tender goal, to lift two living souls gently into the sky and keep them safe. Power in the service of care, machinery in the service of human hope. So picture that scene now, as you settle deeper into the quiet. The tall rocket standing on the historic pad in the soft light. The two astronauts strapped into their capsule at its top, calm and ready. The engines lighting, and the whole vehicle rising smoothly into the sky, carrying its human passengers up and away, safely, gently, into the weightless quiet of orbit. Years of striving resolved into this single, careful act of lifting people toward the stars. And then the deep, floating peace of space, the astronauts drifting weightless in their capsule, the blue Earth turning slowly far below. Humanity had returned to launching its people into the heavens, carried by a rocket that could come home and fly again. In the next chapter, we will follow that capsule the rest of the way, up to the great outpost where humans live and work in orbit, and see how gently these spacecraft come to rest against their home among the stars. Reaching orbit is only the beginning of the journey. Once the astronauts are floating weightless in their capsule, they still have somewhere to go, up to the great outpost where human beings live and work among the stars. And the way their spacecraft arrives there is one of the gentlest things in all of spaceflight. High above the Earth circles the International Space Station, a large laboratory and home in orbit, where astronauts from many nations live for months at a time. It floats around 250 miles above the surface, a distance that sounds enormous, and yet, in the scale of space, is really quite close, just above the top of the atmosphere. And it is always moving, circling the entire planet once every 90 minutes or so, traveling so fast that it loops all the way around the Earth roughly 16 times each day. For the astronauts aboard, this means something wonderful. They see the sun rise and set again and again. 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in every 24 hours, as they race around the world. When the Dragon capsule carries its astronauts up to join this floating home, it must perform a delicate task. It has to catch up with the station, match its tremendous speed exactly, and then ease in to connect with it, all while both spacecraft are hurtling around the Earth at thousands of miles an hour. This might sound frightening, but in practice it is a marvel of patience and precision. The capsule does not rush, it approaches slowly and carefully, closing the distance little by little, creeping toward the station with the utmost gentleness, guided by its own automatic systems that make countless tiny adjustments along the way. And then comes the softest of moments. The capsule, having crept up to the station, gently touches against a docking port, a special doorway built to receive it, and the two spacecraft connect. There is no crash, no jolt, just a slow, careful coming together, the capsule easing into place and latching softly on, becoming one with the station. The whole approach and docking can happen almost entirely on its own, the spacecraft guiding itself in with a precision no human hand could match, so gentle that the astronauts inside barely feel the moment of connection. A spacecraft that had launched atop a pillar of fire arrives at its destination as softly as a boat easing up against a dock. Once connected, the astronauts open the hatch between the capsule and the station and float through, weightless, into their new home in orbit. There they join the crew, already living aboard, and for the months that follow, that floating outpost becomes their world. They conduct experiments, care for the station, exercise to keep their bodies strong in weightlessness, and gaze down through the windows at the breathtaking sight of the whole Earth turning slowly below them, its blue oceans and swirling white clouds, and the thin, glowing line of the atmosphere at its edge. And all the while, the Dragon capsule waits patiently, docked to the station, ready to carry them safely home again when their time in orbit is done. When that day comes, the return is just as gentle in its own way. The astronauts climb back into their capsule, undock softly from the station, and begin the journey down. The capsule slows itself, falls back through the atmosphere, and then, as it nears the Earth, releases great parachutes that billow open above it, catching the air and easing its descent. And rather than landing on hard ground, it comes down softly into the sea, splashing gently into the ocean, where boats are waiting to gather up the capsule and its returning crew. From the fiery power of launch to the soft embrace of the ocean at journey's end, the astronauts are carried and cradled the whole way. There is deep peace in picturing this quiet routine, and it is a lovely thing to rest upon as the night deepens. Right now, as you lie here, there are human beings living in that station high above, circling the Earth every 90 minutes, floating weightless through their days, watching the world turn beneath them. And spacecraft like Dragon carry people gently up to join them and softly home again, easing in and out of orbit with such patience and care. Far above the clouds, above the weather, above almost everything, there is a small, warm, human home floating in the dark, and people are living peacefully within it even now. So let that serene image settle over you. The great station gliding silently around the Earth, bathed in sunlight, its windows glowing. The gentle capsule easing up to meet it, connecting as softly as a whisper, and the astronauts floating weightless through into their home among the stars. No rush, no jolt, only patience and precision and care, carrying people quietly to and from the heavens. High above you tonight, humans are sleeping in orbit, rocked not by any sea, but by the endless, smooth motion of their circling home, watching the Earth turn peacefully below. And you can rest just as peacefully now, here beneath them, as the station glides silently overhead through the dark. In the next chapter, we will look at the thousands upon thousands of smaller spacecraft these rockets have carried up into orbit, the quiet parade of lights that you yourself can sometimes see gliding gently across the night sky. Not all of the spacecraft these rockets carry up are as large as a capsule full of astronauts. Many are small, and there are a great many of them, thousands upon thousands, forming a quiet parade of lights that you yourself can sometimes see gliding across the night sky. This great fleet of small satellites is called Starlink, and its purpose is a gentle and useful one: to bring internet connection down to the Earth from space. All around the world, there are places where it is difficult or impossible to get a good connection to the internet. Remote countryside, distant villages, ships far out at sea, homes tucked away in mountains and forests, far from any cable or tower. For these places, connecting to the rest of the world has always been hard. Starlink was created to solve this by beaming the internet down from above, from a vast web of small satellites circling the Earth, so that even the most remote and isolated places can reach up to the sky and find a connection waiting there. To cover the whole planet this way takes an enormous number of satellites, and so, over the past several years, these rockets have been carrying them up in batch after batch, dozens at a time, launch after launch after launch. The numbers have grown staggering. There are now more than 10,000 of these small satellites circling the Earth, an entire constellation of them woven into a great net around the whole planet, working together to blanket the world in connection. It is one of the largest fleets of spacecraft ever assembled, built up patiently, one rocketful at a time, until the sky itself became a source of the internet. And here is the part that touches ordinary people looking up from their gardens and fields, the quiet wonder that many have now seen with their own eyes. When a fresh batch of these satellites is first launched and released into orbit, they travel for a while in a long, close line, one after another, before they gradually spread out to their final positions. And that line of satellites, catching the light of the sun while the ground below has fallen dark, can be seen from the Earth as a string of soft, steady lights, moving silently across the night sky in single file. People call it the Starlink train. Imagine standing outside on a clear evening, looking up at the familiar stars, and then noticing something strange and beautiful among them. A line of gentle lights, evenly spaced, gliding smoothly and silently across the darkness, one following another, like a string of luminous beads being drawn slowly across the heavens, or a train of quiet lanterns passing overhead. They make no sound. They simply glide, steady and serene, tracing their path across the night before slipping away beyond the horizon. Many people who have seen it unexpectedly describe a moment of genuine awe, a sense of witnessing something quietly magical passing far above them. There is a peaceful magic in that sight, and it is a soothing thing to hold in your mind as the night deepens. Those small, silent lights sliding across the darkness are the work of these rockets, carried up batch by batch and released to circle the Earth, now drifting overhead in their gentle parade. They are a reminder that the sky above us is no longer empty and still, but quietly alive with the fruits of all this patient effort. Thousands of small spacecraft gliding silently around the world, connecting its most distant corners, tracing soft lines of light across the night for anyone who happens to look up at the right moment. And there is something rather beautiful, too, in what they are doing up there. All those thousands of quiet satellites, circling endlessly, exist to reach down to the loneliest and most remote places on Earth and offer them connection, a link to the wider world, to family and friends and knowledge far away. A ship alone on the vast ocean, a home deep in the mountains, a village far from any city, can now look up to the sky and find, gliding silently overhead, a gentle net of light, ready to connect them to everyone else. The rockets carry the satellites up, and the satellites reach back down, drawing the scattered corners of the world a little closer together. So picture that serene parade now, as you let yourself sink further toward rest. A clear, dark night sky, scattered with the ancient stars. And moving gently across it, a long line of soft, silent lights, evenly spaced, gliding smoothly overhead, one after another, tracing their quiet path across the darkness before slipping peacefully away. No sound, no hurry, just those calm lights sailing across the night, carried up by the returning rockets we have followed all this time, now circling the world far above you as you lie here, growing heavier and calmer and closer to sleep. The sky is quietly alive with gentle motion tonight, satellites gliding, the station circling, and all of it moving in silence, far overhead, while you rest safely below. In the next chapter, we will turn to the greatest and most ambitious machine of all, the enormous silver giant now rising, the largest and most powerful rocket that human beings have ever built. Everything we have followed so far, the returning rockets, the astronauts, the fleets of satellites, has been building towards something even greater. For the same company has been quietly assembling the largest and most powerful rocket that human beings have ever built, an enormous silver giant called Starship. To picture Starship, you must first let go of the scale of everything that came before. The rockets we have followed until now are large, but Starship is something else entirely. It stands around 400 feet tall, a tower of metal reaching up higher than almost any rocket in history, so tall that a person standing at its base is a tiny speck against it, so tall that it rivals a good-sized building. When it stands on its launch pad, gleaming in the sunlight, it looks less like a vehicle and more like a monument, a vast silver spire pointed at the sky. It is, quite simply, the biggest and most powerful rocket ever created, surpassing even the mighty rockets that carried astronauts to the moon long ago. And it looks unlike any other rocket because of what it is made from. Most rockets are built from lightweight materials and painted white or wrapped in insulation. Starship is built from shining stainless steel, the same kind of gleaming metal you might find in a fine kitchen, chosen because it is strong, because it can withstand tremendous heat, and because it is far less costly than the exotic materials rockets usually use. The result is that Starship gleams. It catches the light like polished silver, a mirror-bright tower standing against the blue Texas sky, beautiful in a way no rocket has ever quite been before. It looks like something from an old dream of the future, the shining silver rocket ship of childhood imagination, made real at last. Starship comes in two great parts, stacked one atop the other. The lower part is the booster, the enormous first stage that provides the huge initial push to lift the whole thing off the ground. It is called Super Heavy, and it is the most powerful rocket booster ever built. The upper part, riding on top, is the spacecraft itself, confusingly also called Starship, the part that will actually carry cargo and, one day, people onward into space. Together, the booster and the spacecraft form the complete towering vehicle. And here is the crucial thing, the idea at the very heart of it all, the same idea we have followed from the beginning. Both parts are designed to be fully reusable. Not just the booster, but the spacecraft on top as well. Both meant to return to Earth and fly again, so that the entire giant rocket can be used over and over, like an aircraft. This is the great dream taken to its ultimate form. The returning rockets we have marveled at so far bring home only their lower stage. With Starship, the goal is to bring home everything, the whole enormous vehicle, top and bottom, both parts flying back to be reused. If it works fully, it would mean the largest rocket ever built could launch, deliver its cargo, and return itself entirely to Earth, ready to go again and again. It would make reaching space cheaper and more routine than anyone has ever managed. opening the way to carrying not just satellites and small crews, but large numbers of people and vast amounts of cargo far beyond the Earth. All of this is being built at a place on the Texas coast called Starbase, a growing complex near the sea where these silver giants are assembled and launched. There, the enormous vehicles are stacked and tested and flown, rising from the flat coastal landscape into the sky. It is a place unlike anywhere else, where the largest rockets in history are taking shape, where the future of spaceflight is being hammered out in gleaming steel beside the Gulf waters. There is something awe-inspiring in the sheer ambition of it, and it is a grand and soothing thing to contemplate as the night grows late. Think of the audacity of building the largest flying machine in history, and then insisting that it must not be thrown away, but must come home whole and fly again. It is the boldest expression yet of the dream that started this whole story, the dream of a rocket that returns, now applied to a vehicle of almost unimaginable size, a silver tower as tall as a building, meant to rise into space and settle home again, over and over, carrying humanity's hopes upward with it. So picture that gleaming giant now, as you settle deeper towards sleep. A vast silver rocket, 400 feet of polished steel, standing tall and shining on its launch pad beside the sea, catching the light like a mirror pointed at the heavens. The largest and most powerful machine ever built to fly, and yet designed, in the end, to come home gently and rise again. A shining tower of ambition and hope, waiting quietly on the coast for its next journey to the sky. In the next chapter, we will look at the tremendous heart of this giant, the 33 engines that light together beneath it to lift its enormous weight up off the ground and toward the stars. To lift a silver giant as tall as a building up off the ground and towards space takes a truly staggering amount of power. And that power comes from the tremendous heart of the Super Heavy booster, where a great cluster of engines lights together as one. We saw earlier that the Falcon 9 rocket has 9 engines at its base, and that this already gives it enormous strength. The Super Heavy booster, the lower half of Starship, is far larger, and so it needs far more. At the bottom of this booster sit not 9 engines, but 33. 33 engines, packed together in circles at the base of the enormous rocket. More engines than have ever been gathered on a single rocket booster in this way. These are a newer, more advanced kind of engine, called the Raptor, and instead of burning kerosene like the Merlins before them, they burn methane, a simple gas, together with liquid oxygen. Methane was chosen for good reasons that reach all the way to the company's ultimate dream. But for now, simply picture those 33 powerful engines waiting at the base of the giant. When the moment of launch arrives, all 33 of them must light, very nearly together, in a carefully controlled sequence, spread across mere moments. Imagine that. 33 rocket engines, each one tremendously powerful in its own right, all igniting almost at once beneath the towering vehicle, their combined fire erupting downward against the ground. The power unleashed is almost beyond comprehension. It is the most powerful rocket ever to fly, and when its engines light, they produce a force and a sound unlike almost anything else humanity has created. A thunder so deep, it is felt in the body from miles away. A torrent of flame pouring out beneath the rocket as it begins, slowly at first, to rise. And here again we meet the theme that runs through this whole story, the marriage of overwhelming power with careful control. 33 engines firing together is a colossal amount of raw force, but it must all be precisely governed, each engine working in concert with the others, their combined thrust balanced and steered so that the giant rises smoothly and straight rather than tumbling or veering. It is one thing to unleash tremendous power. It is another thing entirely to command it, to hold 33 roaring engines in perfect coordination and guide their combined might so precisely that a 400-foot tower lifts gently and steadily off the pad and climbs toward the sky. That mastery, that control over such enormous force, is what makes it all possible. There is also, once more, a quiet wisdom in the choice of so many engines. Just as the Falcon 9's 9 engines give it a safety net, so too do the Super Heavy's 33. With so many engines sharing the work, the rocket has a margin of safety built into it. Should one or even a few of the engines have trouble, the many others can take up the load, keeping the giant flying. The effort and the risk are spread across all 33, so that the whole enormous machine does not depend on the flawless working of any single one. It is strength through numbers, resilience through sharing the burden, on a truly grand scale. There is something stirring in the thought of all that power waiting, held ready, and it is a grand thing to rest your mind upon as the night deepens. 33 engines, gathered at the base of the largest rocket ever built, capable together of lifting a tower of steel taller than a building up and off the earth. Enough force to shake the ground for miles, to light the sky, to carry the giant toward space. And all of it arranged to work as one, coordinated and controlled and guided with such care that the overwhelming becomes the graceful, the thunderous becomes the steady, and the giant rises smoothly toward the heavens on a pillar of perfectly governed fire. You need not hold on to the number, or the names, or any of the details. Simply let the image wash gently over you. The vast silver rocket standing on its pad, the 33 engines beneath it lighting together in a controlled crescendo of flame, the tremendous rolling thunder, and the great tower lifting slowly, steadily, majestically off the ground, carried upward by all that power held in perfect, careful balance, climbing into the sky as smoothly as if it weighed nothing at all. So picture that magnificent rise now as you sink further toward rest. The largest rocket ever built, lifting away from the Earth on 33 engines of controlled fire, steady and sure, its polished steel gleaming as it climbs. All that power, all that thunder, gathered and guided and turned to the gentle work of lifting a giant toward the stars. Overwhelming strength, held in the calmest of hands, carrying the shining tower smoothly up into the waiting sky. And once the giant has climbed high enough, and the booster has finished its tremendous work, it too must come home, just like all the returning rockets before it. But it comes home in a way more astonishing than any we have seen yet. And that is where we will go in the next chapter, to witness a rocket caught gently out of the very air. The returning rockets we have followed all come home by landing on their own legs, whether on solid ground or on platforms at sea. But the Super Heavy booster, the giant lower half of Starship, comes home in a way more astonishing than any of them. It is caught, gently, out of the very air, by the launch tower itself. The reason for this remarkable method comes down, in part, to size and weight. The Super Heavy booster is enormous, far larger and heavier than the boosters that came before. To fit it with landing legs strong enough to hold its tremendous weight would mean adding a great deal of heavy equipment to the bottom of the rocket, weight that would have to be carried all the way up and back down on every flight, reducing how much the rocket could lift. So the engineers asked a bold question. What if the rocket did not need legs at all? What if, instead of the rocket carrying its own landing gear, the ground could reach up and catch it? And so they built something extraordinary at Starbase. The tall tower beside the launch pad, the structure used to assemble and support the rocket, was fitted with two great mechanical arms, enormous metal beams that can move and swing and close together. These arms have been affectionately nicknamed the chopsticks, because that is rather what they look like, a giant pair of chopsticks reaching out from the tower. And the plan was as audacious as anything in this whole story. The returning booster, falling home from the edge of space, would fly back not to a landing pad, but to the tower, and the two great arms would reach out and catch the descending rocket in midair, closing gently around it and holding it up, plucking it from the sky before it ever touched the ground. Picture the sheer daring of that. A rocket booster the size of a tall building, weighing hundreds of tons, falling back from space, slowing itself with its engines, and then, instead of setting down on legs, easing itself into position right beside the tower and hovering there, held steady, while two massive metal arms close softly around it and take its weight. The precision required is almost beyond belief. The giant rocket must guide itself to exactly the right spot, to within a small margin, and hold itself there gently enough for the arms to catch it without harm. It is like catching a falling tower with a pair of tongs, and doing it so softly that nothing is damaged. For a long time, this seemed almost too ambitious to be real. And then, in the autumn of the year 2024, they did it. A super heavy booster launched, did its work, and fell back home to the tower. It slowed, steadied itself in the air beside the great arms, and the arms reached out and caught it, closing around the descending giant and holding it safely aloft. For the first time in history, a returning rocket had been caught out of the sky by its own launch tower. Hundreds of tons of rocket, plucked gently from the air by a pair of mechanical arms, held softly in place where a heartbeat before it had been falling from space. Those who witnessed it could scarcely believe their eyes. It is perhaps the single most astonishing feat in the whole of this story, and it is a wondrous thing to rest your mind upon as the night grows late. Consider the gentleness hidden inside all that power. A rocket of unimaginable size and weight, returning from the edge of space, and rather than crashing or even landing, it is caught, softly, tenderly, out of the air, held aloft by waiting arms, as carefully as you might catch something precious and fragile before it falls. All the might of the largest rocket ever built, resolved into a moment of the most delicate precision. A giant plucked gently from the sky and cradled safely home. It is power and tenderness together, on a scale almost impossible to imagine. And the ambition does not stop there. Having learned to catch the booster from the sky, the engineers now work toward catching the upper part of the rocket, the spacecraft itself, in the very same way, so that one day both halves of the giant might be plucked gently from the air and set down ready to fly again. The dream is a rocket that returns entirely, caught softly home, top and bottom, and readied for its next journey with the least possible delay. So picture that astonishing, gentle moment now, as you settle deeper into rest. The vast rocket falling home from space through the evening sky, slowing, steadying, easing itself into place beside the tall tower, and then the two great arms reaching out and closing softly around it, catching the descending giant from the air and holding it safe and still. Hundreds of tons of rocket cradled gently aloft. All that power caught as tenderly as a falling leaf. The largest of machines, brought home by the softest of catches beneath the darkening sky. In the next chapter, we will look at how this giant rocket has been perfected, not all at once, but through the patient and forgiving art of trying and learning and trying again. A giant as complex as Starship is not perfected in a single stroke of genius. It has been shaped instead through a gentler and more forgiving path, the patient art of trying something, watching closely what happens, learning from it, and then trying again, better each time. Most great machines, in the past, were built with the goal of working perfectly on the very first attempt. Engineers would spend years testing every part on the ground, running endless calculations and simulations, striving to anticipate every possible problem before the machine ever flew, because a failure was seen as a disaster to be avoided at almost any cost. It is a careful and sensible approach, but it is also slow, and it can only take you so far, because no amount of testing on the ground can ever fully reveal what will happen when a real rocket flies in the real world. The team building Starship chose a different path, one that treats failure not as a disaster, but as a teacher. Rather than trying to make everything perfect before the first flight, they build a rocket, fly it, and watch very carefully what happens. If something goes wrong, they do not see it as a catastrophe. They see it as information, a lesson about the real behavior of the rocket that no ground test could ever have taught them. They study exactly what happened, understand why, and then build the next rocket better, with that lesson built in. Then they fly again, and learn again, and improve again. Step by step, flight by flight, the rocket grows more capable, guided by the hard, honest lessons of real experience. In the early flights of Starship, this meant that the giant sometimes did not complete its journey. A test flight might end early, the rocket lost before all its goals were met. To an outside eye, this could look like failure, even disaster. But to the people building it, each of these flights was a success of a different kind, because each one taught them something vital, revealed some weakness to be strengthened, some problem to be solved, that they could then fix for the next attempt. Far from being discouraged, they gathered up the lessons and pressed on, and the rocket got better and better with each flight, advancing at a remarkable pace precisely because it was willing to stumble and learn. And that patient, forgiving approach has borne fruit. Flight after flight, the giant has grown steadier and more capable. It has learned to launch cleanly, to separate its two stages, to guide its booster home to that astonishing catch by the tower. And in time, the upper spacecraft too learned to fly its full path, out into space and back, returning through the atmosphere and settling softly and intact into the sea, its journey complete, deploying satellites along the way. What began as brief and troubled early flights has matured, through steady learning, into a rocket that flies its mission and comes home whole. The giant was not born perfect. It was raised, patiently, through trying and learning, into something that works. There is a deep and gentle wisdom in this, and it is a comforting thing to rest upon as the night grows late, because it is really a lesson about how all growth happens. We so often fear failure, treat it as something shameful, something to be avoided at all costs. But here is one of the greatest engineering achievements of our age, built precisely by embracing failure, by treating each stumble not as a defeat, but as a lesson, a step forward, a gift of hard-won knowledge. The rocket did not succeed in spite of its early failures. It succeeded because of them, because each one taught something that made the next attempt better. There is real comfort in that, if you let it settle into you. It means that stumbling is not the opposite of progress, but often a part of it. It means that the things that go wrong are not the end of the road, but lessons along the way, quietly shaping something better. The giant silver rocket that now flies to space and returns home whole was, not long ago, a series of troubled early flights that many would have called failures. And it became what it is, precisely by learning, gently and without shame, from every one of them. Every stumble was a teacher. Every setback was a step. So let that forgiving thought carry you further toward rest. There is no need to be perfect, not for a rocket, and not for any of us. There is only the gentle, patient path of trying, and learning, and trying again, each attempt a little wiser than the last. The largest rocket ever built was raised that way, through kindness toward its own failures, until it learned at last to fly and to come home. And there is a deep peace in knowing that progress does not demand perfection, only the willingness to keep gently learning. In the next chapter, we will follow that giant on the hardest part of its journey home, the fiery passage back down through the atmosphere, and see how steel can pass through fire and return whole. Of all the challenges these rockets face, none is fiercer than the journey home through the atmosphere. Coming back from space means passing through a wall of fire, and to survive it, the giant silver spacecraft must be wrapped in a shield against the flames. The difficulty comes from sheer speed. A spacecraft returning from space is moving astonishingly fast, many times faster than a rifle bullet. As it plunges back down toward the Earth and meets the thickening air of the atmosphere, that air cannot get out of the way quickly enough. It piles up and compresses against the front of the spacecraft with such violence that it heats to a tremendous temperature, thousands of degrees, hot enough to melt most metals. The returning spacecraft becomes wrapped in a sheath of glowing, superheated air, a cocoon of fire, as it tears down through the sky. This is the price of coming home from space. To return, you must pass through fire. To survive that fiery passage, the spacecraft needs a shield, and here the engineers turned to a clever solution. They covered the belly of the Starship spacecraft, the side that faces the oncoming heat as it falls, with thousands of small heat-resistant tiles, a protective skin of special material, able to withstand the terrible temperatures of return. These tiles take the brunt of the fire, absorbing and resisting the heat, keeping the steel of the spacecraft beneath them, safe and whole, while the world outside blazes. Row upon row of these tiles cover the vehicle's underside, a patient armor against the flames, each one placed to guard the giant through its trial by fire. Picture the descent itself, because it is a thing of terrible beauty. The spacecraft, having done its work in space, turns and begins to fall back toward the Earth. It plunges into the upper atmosphere, and almost at once the fire begins, the air around it glowing brighter and brighter as it heats, until the whole vehicle is wrapped in a fierce, luminous glow, streaking down through the sky like a great man-made shooting star, trailing fire behind it. Inside that blazing sheath, the spacecraft holds steady, protected by its tiles, riding down through the inferno. From the ground far below, it would appear as a brilliant point of light crossing the heavens, glowing with the heat of its return. And then, having survived the worst of the fire, the giant does something graceful. As it descends into the thicker, calmer air lower down, it slows, and it shifts its position, and it prepares for the final gentle part of its journey. It fires its engines to slow itself further, easing its tremendous fall, and settles down softly toward the waiting sea, or toward its tower. On its recent successful flights, the great spacecraft has come down through all that fire and then settled, calm and intact, onto the surface of the ocean, its steel body whole, its tiles having passed through the wall of flame and emerged safely on the other side. Cameras aboard have even shown the shield glowing during the fiercest heat, and then, remarkably, the vehicle floating quietly afterward, having survived. There is something profound and stirring in that image, and it is a powerful thing to rest your mind upon as the night deepens. A vehicle of steel, falling from space, passing through a wall of fire thousands of degrees hot, wrapped in glowing flame, and yet protected by its patient shield of tiles, emerging on the other side whole and unharmed, to settle gently down to Earth. It is one of the most dramatic passages in all of engineering, and yet it ends not in destruction, but in a soft and safe arrival. The fire is survived, the steel comes home. There is a kind of quiet reassurance in that if you let it settle over you. Even the fiercest trial, the hottest fire, can be passed through and survived, given the right protection and the right preparation. The returning spacecraft does not avoid the fire, for it cannot. It goes straight through the heart of it, shielded and steady, and comes out whole on the far side, settling gently home. There is a gentle strength in that image, of enduring the fiercest passage and emerging safe, of coming through the fire and finding calm waters waiting on the other side. So picture that fiery homecoming now, and then its peaceful end, as you sink further towards sleep. The giant silver spacecraft falling from the black of space, wrapping itself in glowing flame as it meets the air, streaking down the sky like a great shooting star. And then the fire passed, the vehicle slowing, steadying, easing itself down through the calm lower air, and settling softly at last onto the quiet surface of the sea, whole and safe, its long fiery journey home complete, through the fire and into stillness, through the blaze and home to calm water. In the next chapter, the second to last of our long night, we will look at the ultimate purpose behind all of this, the distant and patient dream that all these rockets are truly reaching toward, the dream of carrying humanity to other worlds. Behind every returning rocket, every gentle landing, every silver giant rising from the Texas coast, there lies a single distant dream, the purpose toward which all of it is patiently reaching. It is the dream of carrying humanity beyond the Earth, to the Moon, and one day, to Mars. This was the goal from the very beginning, the reason the whole company was founded all those years ago, not merely to launch satellites or to make spaceflight cheaper, though it has done both, but ultimately to help our species become what it called multiplanetary, to become a people who live not only on Earth, but on other worlds as well. Every step we have followed tonight, the returning rockets, the reusability, the giant starship, has been, in the end, a step toward that far horizon. The landings and the catches and the patient learning are not the destination. They are the road, and the road leads outward, away from the only home humanity has ever known. The first great stop on that road is the Moon. After more than half a century, human beings are preparing to return to its surface, and the giant starship has been chosen to play a central part in carrying them there. A version of the great spacecraft is being prepared to serve as the vehicle that will lower astronauts down to the Moon's surface and lift them back up again, helping humanity set foot once more upon that pale, familiar world that has hung in our night sky since the beginning of time, to stand again on the Moon, and this time perhaps to stay, to build, to explore, is the nearer part of the dream, and it is drawing closer. But the Moon is only the beginning, the true and ultimate goal, the one that has driven this whole endeavor from its first uncertain days, lies far beyond, at the red planet, Mars. Mars is the world that has captured human imagination for as long as we have looked up and wondered. A cold and distant desert planet, tens of millions of miles away, glowing faintly red in our night sky. And the dream, the vast and patient dream at the heart of it all, is that one day the giant starship, or its descendants, might carry human beings all that immense distance across the void, to land upon Mars and begin, slowly, to live there, to make our species one that dwells on more than a single world. It is important to be honest and gentle about this. That final dream has not yet come to pass. No one has yet traveled to Mars. It remains a goal, a distant horizon, something that will take many more years, perhaps decades, of patient work to achieve. if it is achieved at all. The journey to Mars is enormously difficult, longer and harder than anything yet attempted, and it lies still in the future, uncertain and unproven. But that is the nature of great dreams. They are reached for long before they are grasped, pursued patiently across many years by people who may not live to see them fulfilled, each generation carrying the work a little further toward the horizon. There is something quietly magnificent in the scale of that ambition, and it is a soothing thing to rest your mind upon as the night grows deep. To lift your eyes not just to the next flight or the next year, but to a horizon decades away, to the idea of human beings one day living upon another world entirely. It is a dream so vast that it dwarfs all our ordinary concerns, so patient that it must be measured not in days but in generations. And there is a strange peace in contemplating something that large and that far away, the way there is peace in gazing up at the distant stars. Our small worries grow quiet beside so great and so patient a hope. And whether or not that dream is ever fully reached, there is beauty simply in the reaching, in a species that looks up at a red point of light in the night sky and decides, patiently and stubbornly, to try to go there. All the rockets we have followed, all the landings and the fire and the years of learning are expressions of that ancient human urge to explore, to reach beyond the familiar, to see what lies over the next horizon, even when that horizon is another planet entirely. It is one of the oldest and most beautiful things about us, and it is very much alive tonight, reaching quietly toward Mars. So let that vast and gentle dream settle over you now, as you sink toward sleep. The returning rockets, the silver giants, all of them patiently reaching outward, toward the moon drawing near, and toward the distant red planet glowing faintly in the dark. A dream measured in generations, calm and patient and enormous, of humanity one day living among more than one world. There is nothing to do about it tonight, but wonder at it gently, and let its vastness quiet your mind, as the far horizon of Mars waits patiently in the dark, and the work of reaching toward it goes quietly on. In the final chapter, we will come back home, all the way back to you, lying here beneath the same sky that holds all of these wonders, and let ourselves come gently to rest beneath the stars. And so, after our long journey out to the edge of space and back, we come home at last, all the way back to you, lying here quietly beneath the very same sky that holds every wonder we have spoken of tonight. Because that is the loveliest thing to remember now, as our night together draws to its close. All of this is real, and all of it is happening above you, under the same stars you could see if you stepped outside your door. This is not a distant fairy tale set in some far-off place. The sky over your head right now is quietly alive with everything we have followed. Let yourself picture it, softly, as you rest. High above you, at this very moment, the space station is circling the Earth, carrying human beings who are floating weightless through their day, watching the world turn beneath them, crossing from daylight into darkness and back again every 90 minutes. If you knew when to look, you could see it pass, a single bright point of light moving smoothly and silently across the night sky, gone in a few minutes. People are living up there tonight, above the clouds, above the weather, above almost everything, and they will sleep tonight as you will, rocked by the endless smooth motion of their circling home. And gliding among the stars, in their quiet parades, are the thousands of small satellites, tracing their soft lines of light across the darkness, connecting the most distant corners of the world, sliding silently overhead, one after another. Somewhere out there, too, far beyond them all, a bright red car is still sailing peacefully around the sun, its spacey-suited driver calm at the wheel, on the longest and most tranquil journey imaginable, going quietly on and on through the beautiful dark. And down on the earth, tonight or tomorrow, a slender rocket will rise into the sky and then come home again, falling gently back to land on its legs or to be caught softly from the air, ready to fly once more. All of it, above you and around you, part of the same living sky. The returning rockets, the astronauts, the gliding satellites, the silver giants, the distant dream reaching out toward the moon and Mars. A whole quiet symphony of human wonder unfolding overhead, right now, as you lie here, safe and warm and still. And you are part of it too, simply by being here. Beneath it all, a small and peaceful point on the turning earth that all these rockets rise from and return to. There is such deep comfort in that, and it is the perfect thought to carry you the rest of the way down into sleep. For all the vastness of space, for all the fire and power and distance, the whole story comes back, in the end, to something gentle, to rockets that come home, to astronauts carried safely up and softly back, to dreams reached for patiently across the generations. It is a story, underneath everything, about coming home, about tremendous journeys that end in gentle landings, about power always turned, in the end, toward care and safety and return. And now it is your turn to come home too, home to rest, home to sleep. Like the rockets we have followed all through this long night, you have carried yourself through all the distance of your day, through all its effort and its miles. And now it is time to come gently back to earth and be still. There is nothing more to reach for tonight, nothing more to do, only to let yourself settle, softly and completely, the way a returning rocket settles home, easing down through its final moments into perfect stillness. Let your body grow heavy and calm. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let every thought of the day loosen and float gently away, up into the vast and peaceful dark, among the quiet satellites, and the circling station, and the far red car sailing around the sun. Let it all go, softly, and let yourself sink down into rest, held safe upon the turning earth beneath the living sky. Somewhere above you tonight, a rocket is coming home, slowing gently, reaching out, and settling softly into stillness. The station is gliding silently through the dark. The satellites are tracing their quiet lights across the stars, and far away, a little red car sails peacefully on through the endless, beautiful night, all of it calm, all of it gentle, all of it turning quietly around you as you finally let go. Rest now, beneath the stars. The journey is over, and you are home, and the same sky that carries all those wonders is watching gently over you as you sink softly, peacefully, all the way down into sleep. Sleep well, and let the quiet stars carry you the rest of the way. My dear sleep science lovers, could you please say in the comments where you're watching from right now? Also, good news. Simple Sleepy Science episodes are now available for free on Spotify. Use the link in the description or on the channel profile to enjoy our stories there.